Well, a pleasant hello. This is Dan Arth, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the Tuesday, August 25th issue of the Democrat Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Let's go right to the front page. Tricky winter predicted for New York. Farmer's Almanac. Tricky winter predicted for New York. Article is by Victoria E. Friel. Fall hasn't even started yet, but the Farmer's Almanac is already looking ahead to winter, and its forecast for New York is expected to be, quote, complicated. The publication has released its extended winter weather forecast, and conditions could vary across the state depending on where you live. New York and the Northeast could see heavy, wet snow throughout the winter, according to the long-range forecast, but the season also could feature mild stretches interrupted by brief cold snaps. Prepare for a winter of snow, sleet, and surprises, according to the Farmer's Almanac report. Keep the snow shovel, rain boots, and ice scraper close at hand. This winter, you may need all three. A tricky and unpredictable mix of rain, sleet, ice, and heavy wet snow is expected across the Northeast this winter, which the Farmer's Almanac describes as one of the season's most complicated winter patterns. Coastal communities could see more rain or mixed precipitation, while inland areas may experience several rounds of heavy wet snow, particularly during January and February. Small shifts in storm tracks could determine whether an area receives rain, sleet, freezing rain, or accumulating snow. According to the forecast, that means forecasts could change as individual storms approach. So when is the first day of winter? Well, the winter solstice, which marks the start of astronomical winter in the United States, is December 21st. This year, that's a Monday. And when does winter end? Winter ends March 20th, 2027, when the spring equinox occurs. How accurate is the Farmer's Almanac? The Farmer's Almanac creates its long-range forecast using a proprietary forecasting method. Its forecasts can offer a general outlook for the season, but they are not a substitute for short-term forecasts from the National Weather Service as winter approaches. End of article. And our next article is from the front page also of the Democrat Chronicle. Navy families irate at Trump. Comments. Many worry for loved ones aboard Lincoln carrier. Article is by Chris Quintana. A senior Navy machinist aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln pinged a family group chat in early May, asking her sister and mother whether they'd taken time off to be at her grandson's graduation at Morehouse College. Getting the 22-year-old kinesiology major through college had taken a fair amount of fussing, cursing, and headaches, but it seemed like he'd finally made it to the finish line, and there was cause for celebration. The combat with Iran was dragging along. Internet service aboard the carrier was unreliable. The machinist said, quote, "Graduation is in 12 days. Sadly, I may not even get to see pics of my boy on one of the most important days of his life," she wrote in the group chat. Quote, "This was one of the biggest fears, not to be here for him at a time like this." Tamika Kyles, the older sister of the machinist aboard the Lincoln, nearly cried as she shared details of her sister's deployment with a USA Today reporter. She said her sister joined the military to provide a better life for her son. Quote, "How about you bring your family out there? How about you go out there and try and then tell us how it feels?" Quote by Tamika Kyles. Kyles and another family member who spoke with USA Today both requested anonymity for their loved ones for fear of reprisal. On August 20th, U.S. Central Command announced the aircraft carrier USS George Washington had arrived in the Arabian Sea, and several media outlets reported the same day that the Lincoln was heading back to San Diego. USA Today reported in April on conditions aboard the Lincoln, and the USS Tripoli also deployed to the Middle East. A photo shared with a USA Today reporter showed a small handful of boiled carrots, a dry meat patty, and a slab of gray processed meat from a meal on the Lincoln. The change in warships come after a fresh barrage of reporting about diminishing food supplies, a lack of hygiene products, and declining mental health for service members who have been on the Lincoln since November 2025. Outlets including Stars and Stripes and Military Times reported that crew members were struggling with their mental health, and some had attempted to jump off the ship. The crew still faces weeks on the water after spending more than 200 days without a port visit. It's one of the longest stretches for personnel on a modern aircraft carrier. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth and Trump both pushed back on accounts of substandard conditions on the carrier, calling the reports overblown or outright false. Parents, siblings, and spouses have expressed frustration with the administration's remarks on social media and to media outlets. The high-profile denials were frustrating and even enraging to families like Kyle's, who have seen what life on the warship looks like and heard detailed accounts of the challenges their loved ones faced during their protracted deployment. She told USA Today she was especially upset when Trump said August 14th that families were not concerned about the relatives, adding that in his view the deployment had not gone on nearly long enough. Kyle suggested, "How about you bring your family out there?" Recalling her immediate response to the president's remarks, "How about you go out there and try and then tell us how it feels?" The White House did not respond specifically to questions about the president's remarks or conditions families mentioned on the ship. However, Anna Kelly, a White House spokesperson, said the president had restored a focus on readiness, lethality, and supporting our war fighters at the Pentagon after years of failure by the Biden administration. The president cares about our troops more than anyone, and he is ensuring our brave service members have all the resources they need to be successful as the United States military continues to economically strangle the Iranian regime, Kelly said. Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat Connecticut, ranking member of the Veterans Affairs Committee and member of the Armed Services Committee, said he had heard, quote, dramatically and directly accounts about, quote, shortages of food, clean water, and other necessities like toothpaste and soap on the Lincoln. Quote, the mental stress of not knowing when the deployment will end, along with those conditions, has imposed really serious anguish and anxiety, he said. Red velvet cake, but no happy surprises. Christy McGarry's family often worries about the impact of what has felt like an unending deployment on her 22-year-old son. He worked as a cook on the Lincoln and now works in the aircraft carrier's shipping department. He surprised her during his freshman year of college when he told her he wanted to quit school and join the Navy. They are not a military family, but he argued it would give him money to pay for his education without racking up student debt. She swallowed her concerns and supported his ambitions. At first, she had no reason to worry. She said during his first deployment aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, he texted and called with regularity and seemed upbeat. But the current deployment felt different almost immediately, she said. For one thing, they could go up to a month or two without any contact as opposed to the weekly calls she was accustomed to on the last deployment. He was frustrated, she said, that the ship had not been to a port without explanation. McGarry said she, too, has been concerned about her son, and the president doesn't, quote, get to tell me how I feel about that. What really seemed to get to her son, she said, was the crew's ever-changing return date. His sister was getting married in June, and they had assumed, based on what commanding officers originally indicated, he would be back with plenty of time to attend her garden wedding in the mountains of Colorado. But the day came and went with her son crammed into his quarters on the ship while his older brother and other family members danced at the wedding. His mom recalled they ate red velvet cake, a favorite of her son's. The bride, a mother hen to her younger brother, had hoped until the last moment he might make an appearance. I think she really thought that I was going to surprise her and it was going to be one of those Facebook moments, McGarry said, but it was not. Living like this has had other real consequences for service members aboard the ship. Kyle said her sister, the senior machinist, has lost about 10 to 15 pounds. The senior machinist also said there were points when she ran out of soap or laundry detergent. Kyle's once saw what the food looks like during a video call What the machinist showed her, she said, looked like slop that people would not even feed to a dog. McGarry shared texts in which her son wrote the ship had been without hot water in an apparent attempt, he wrote, to encourage crew members to keep their showers short. When he spoke with her in mid-August, he told her the toilets break down and stay unrepaired far too long. Kyles also said it took 3 to 4 months for packages to reach her sister. McGarry's son told his mom not to bother sending packages because people weren't receiving them. Blumenthal told USA Today he was concerned about unreliable package delivery, describing mail as an important link between families and their loved ones. I've said to people, quote, a stale cookie in a care package is worth its weight in gold, he said. You know someone you loved it, baked it. As a morale booster, it's invaluable, and the lack of it is a kind of a sign of abandonment. And our next headline, or front page story, is Gates Lions Park gets $150,000 for upgrades. Article by Janae Shields. Lions Park in Gates will receive a $150,000 state grant for renovations. Lions Park spans more than 14 acres, available for residents year-round. Located at 100 Kentucky Avenue, the park features an enclosed shelter with a covered patio and kitchen, 3 lighted tennis courts, a lighted basketball court, sand volleyball, soccer football field, and a playground. The newly secured grant will allow for renovations that include expanding public accessibility, safe multi-use recreation spaces, and strengthening infrastructure to better serve the community. Grant funding will go toward the construction of an updated playground and additional outdoor restrooms. This grant, quote, this grant will allow us to create modern, accessible, and enjoyable recreation spaces for residents of all ages. The updated playground and new standalone restroom facilities will strengthen our park's infrastructure and help us better serve families, community group, and visitors for years to come, said Town Supervisor Cosmo Guente in a statement. Lions Park hosts a youth summer camp program and sports camp annually. The town hopes the renovations will expand opportunities for all ages and abilities and enhance visitor experience. End of article. All right, let's head over to sports. Pittsford has skills for another deep run. Article is by James Johnson. There should be no surprise if Pittsford makes another run to a sectional football final this season. After all, the Panthers are like most Section 5 Class AA teams, in the mix to contend for a championship, according to Pittsford coach Steve Marriott. Quote, it's probably the most parity you've seen in AA in a while, Marriott said. The Panthers, aided by several two-way starters, returned 6 offensive starters and 5 defensive starters from last season's sectional finalist team. Pittsford is set at quarterback. One storyline to watch is whether the connection between quarterback Brody Pusateri and 2025 Democrat and Chronicle All-Greater Rochester receiver defensive back Deshaun Preston is improved. Marriott points out that there is a chemistry with Pusateri and the entire offense, including junior receiver defensive back Jesse Jablonski. On defense, 3 of the team's top linebackers are seniors: Max Ciavari, Ashton Hanlon, and Nick Stancompiano all started last season. The Panthers appear to need defensive linemen to establish themselves, but Marriott said the new starters are prepared. Quote, some guys who have rotated in, I tried to do that each year, Marriott said. Quote, you feel comfortable with a kid who is stepping into a starting role. He's stepping in and he's played varsity snaps. Also, they've been in the weight room and trained all off season, end of quote. If the defensive line develops and the offense clicks, Pittsford should again be in the sectional championship conversation. Quote, after making it to the final, we're going to have a target on our back, Marriott said. It's something that we have to be well aware of. Pittsford football at a glance. Head coach Steve Marriott. Classification AA League Division, Monroe County. Last season's record, 6-5, lost to Penfield. Section 5 Class AA Final. Last Section 5 championship, none as the Panthers. Won as Pittsford Mendon in 1982. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. And our next sports article, Titans have holes to fill, but believes next wave is ready. Article is by Justin Ritzel. Webster Thomas is well aware of the conversation around its team entering 2026. In fairness, it's easy to overlook a team that lost its all-Greater Rochester running back and graduated its starting quarterback and the entire offensive line. Referencing his current group success as freshman and at the JV level, Jason Jobson thinks his Titans are set to surprise this fall. Quote, "They did a great job the last 2 seasons of setting the standard for us to follow and to take it to the next level. But we've got guys out here that nobody's even heard of that are just bought into the team," Jobson said. Quote, "There were seniors in front of them, but we have a lot of good players that bought in and waited for their time," end of quote. It was an unceremonious ending to an otherwise stellar season for Webster Thomas in 2025. The Titans lost their season opener against Brighton, but then reeled off 6 straight wins to earn the Class A1 section tournament's number 2 seed. In the quarterfinals against Victor, a team Thomas had beaten by 2 touchdowns during the regular season, the Titans offense was bottled up in a 12-6 loss. Thomas now turns to a new core group that looks to make noise in Monroe County. The Titans believe their skill positions will be the calling card as new linemen settle into increased roles. Senior Ashton Thomas is the reigning state champion in the triple jump, while Kamir Johnson is another speedy track athlete. One standout so far has been quarterback Marco Mercado, who takes over behind center for his senior year. Jobson, keen on attendance, said the Titans offered 95 opportunities for off-season work from January 1 to the start of official practices between summer camps, weightlifting, and quarterback school. Mercado was present for 93. Quote, "He's been impressive," Jobson said. "He just loves the game. I have to tell him to stop throwing because he'll come out here and throw all the time," end of quote. Thompson opens its schedule against a unique opponent in Section 4's Maine Endwell, a program that made 4 straight state final appearances from 2021 to 2024, winning the first 2. Then it's into the grind of Monroe County, where Thomas will face annual powers like Brighton and Irondequoit. Regrettably, Webster Schroeder is not on the team's schedule. Whether the Titans match last year's win total is of less concern to Jobson, who is more concerned with his team's mentality and the process. Quote, "I'm not big on winning. I'm big on trying to win, and there is a difference," Jobson said. Quote, "Sometimes there's time when you try your hardest and don't win, and I'm okay with that. It means we're going to continue to fight and try to win in everything we do. A lot of times with this group and the history they have, they will be successful." And a quick glance at Webster Thomas football head coach Jason Jobson, 3rd season. Classification Class A1, last season's record 6-2, lost to Victor in Class A1 quarterfinals. Last Section 5 championship was 2005. End of article. All right, our next article, we'll move to Nation and World. U.S. widens sanctions on Iran. Treasury Secretary says no nation above reach of economic measures. Article is by David Lauder and Humora Pamuk from Reuters. The United States, on October 24, unveiled an expansion of sanctions that it said would cut off Iran's economic lifeline, but stopped short of the most punishing measures, instead putting the world on notice to cease doing business with the Islamic Republic. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said other countries would need to sever business ties with Iran or risk being forced out of the dollar-based financial system. But he declined to identify the countries that would be targeted or reveal when those penalties would take effect, saying he would instead provide them time to comply with the new directive. Quote, "We are giving everyone the opportunity to remedy bad behavior. Why would I want to blow up the global financial system?" Bessent said at a news conference. The Treasury Department did announce new sanctions on 60 individuals, entities, and vessels, but the list did not include any of the Chinese financial institutions suspected of facilitating Iran's oil trade. Struggling to resolve an unpopular war that has pushed energy prices higher, Washington appears to be counting on further economic pressure, even though Iran has spent decades under layers of U.S. and international sanctions that have battered its economy but have not deterred its leadership. Though neither side has launched major strikes in weeks, the war shows little sign of reaching a diplomatic solution. In the meantime, the United States is seeking new ways to end Iranian attacks on ships in the Gulf, and more recently via its allies in the Red Sea. Before the announcement, Iran threatened both a possible military response and further reduction in oil exports from the Gulf in response to any U.S. economic measures. Afterward, Iranian Economic Minister Ali Mandazadeh said, quote, "We are fully prepared for the U.S. sanctions. Naturally, the enemies intend to launch an economic terrorist attack on us, but we also have our own tools and know how to play the game. Our defense is no longer so defensive. The enemies should wait for an attack," Madan Azada told state television. Brigadier General Hassan Mohabi, a spokesperson for Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, vowed heavy blows to U.S. vital interests and energy choke points if Iran's infrastructure is threatened, Press TV reported. Almost 6 months have passed since the United States and Israel launched strikes on Iran, sparking a conflict that has snarled shipping in the region, reduced the flow of oil, and taken a toll on the U.S. and global economies. Thousands of people have died, most of them in Iran and Lebanon. While the war has degraded much of Iran's conventional military capacity, inflicted economic pain, and killed then Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran has preserved enough missile and drone capability to attack its Gulf neighbors and threaten oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz, bringing shipping in the key waterway to a near standstill. The exact state of Iran's nuclear program, which the Americans and Israelis aim to wipe out, remains unknown. Oil prices fell more than $2 a barrel on August 24th, though investors braced for the prospect of further supply disruptions from the Middle East. Madan Zadeh, the economy minister, said neither China nor Russia had, quote, accepted the U.S. measures and predicted other countries would resist them. Bessent previously urged cooperation from China, the biggest buyer of Iranian oil for several years, although the U.S. blockade of Iran's ports, renewed in mid-July, has already cut Iranian oil flows to China. Experts say Washington is weary of Chinese retaliation from any sanctions on its banks ahead of expected talks next month between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, with any curbs on Chinese exports of critical minerals especially sensitive. Asked about Chinese banks on August 24th, Bessent said, quote, "We want to make clear here today that no one is above the reach of U.S. sanctions." The Chinese Foreign Ministry said sanctions and pressure tactics do not help, and Beijing would do what was necessary to protect China's interests. Bessent said the Treasury Department has mapped the networks, facilitators, and financial channels that Iran uses to smuggle oil and evade sanctions. He said Washington would be working with U.S. partners to target any source of Iran's, quote, illicit revenue. The department said the Iranian government was using 5 sectors: digital assets, technology, gold, aviation, and shipping to prop up its economy, and they were on notice for sanctions Earlier on August 24th, Iran issued a new warning to shipping not to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without its permission, listing 45 ships it said had violated its rules and threatening retaliation for any ship-to-ship transfers with them. U.S. Secretary Pete Hegseth said on August 24th that Trump's administration was not ruling out using military force against Iran, even as Washington unveiled an economic D-Day against Tehran. Quote, by no means are we foreclosing using kinetic strikes anywhere in the Strait of Hormuz or around Iran, Hegseth told reporters, adding that Iran could handle the economic pressure being put on it, could not handle the economic pressure being put on it. End of article. And now to our next article. Trump orders U.S. flags lowered for Dolly Parton after singer dies at age 80. President Donald Trump said he ordered U.S. flags lowered in honor of country music icon Dolly Parton, who died Tuesday at age 80. Trump announced the order in a Truth Social post shortly after Parton's death was announced. He said flags across the country would be lowered for 1 week beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern Time on August 25th. Very, quote, very sad to report that Dolly Parton, one of the greatest country singers and far beyond ever, has just passed away. This is a true loss for millions of people. There has never been anyone like her and never will, Trump wrote. Quote, in her honor, I am lowering the American flag throughout the United States for a 1 week period beginning tonight at 6 p.m. Rest in peace, Dolly. The world loves you. Parton's death was announced in a video message from her nephew, Brian Seaver, posted to her social media pages. Quote, Dolly has lived in the light and is in the arms of Jesus, surely met by her husband, Carl, her parents, and countless others who have watched her and longed for her to meet them in the heavens, Seaver said in the video. No cause of death was disclosed. Parton's publicist said she died peacefully in Nashville. Concerns about Parton's health had grown in 2025 after she postponed a concert tour because of what she described as, quote, health challenges. Her sister, Frida Parton, later publicly asked fans to pray for her. Parton rose from a poor upbringing in rural Tennessee to become one of the most successful and recognizable entertainers in American history. Over a career spanning nearly 6 decades, she sold more than 100 million records and won 11 Grammy Awards. Her enduring hits included Jolene, 9 to 5, Coat of Many Colors, and I Will Always Love You. Her career extended far beyond music. Parton became a film and television star, businesswoman, and philanthropist while building a fan base that crossed generations and musical genres. Parton's legacy also included Broadway. She received a Tony Award nomination for writing the score for 9 to 5, the musical, which opened on Broadway in 2009. She also recently announced plans to bring her life story to Broadway. Her autobiographical production, Dolly, a true original musical, is scheduled to begin preview performances December 7th at the St. James Theater in New York City. Opening night is planned for January 19th, 2027, which would have been Parton's 81st birthday. The musical features some of her best-known songs, along with new music written for the production. Beyond entertainment, Parton was widely known for her charitable work. She donated $1 million to vaccine research at Vanderbilt University in 2020, becoming an early supporter of research that contributed to the development of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine. End of article. All right, let's move back over to sports and the NFL. How will international expansion look? Article is by Nate Davis of the USA Today. The NFL's ever-growing international footprint could soon be on the verge of a more permanent foothold, and maybe more. League Commissioner Roger Goodell recently told former New York Giants defensive lineman Marcus Kuhn in the German media outlet RTL-NTV that at some point there will be NFL teams outside the USA, adding, quote, "I have no doubt that this will happen one day." And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. It's a telling admission from Goodell, who has typically tamped down such speculation while touting the league's desire to continue feeding its growing interest abroad with an expanded inventory of games. The NFL will play a record 9 international dates during the 2026 season, including its regular season debuts in Melbourne, Rio de Janeiro, and Paris. And despite a historic reluctance to indulge the idea of staging the Super Bowl outside U.S. borders, Roger Goodell also gave that notion some oxygen, telling Kuhn, quote, "There are definitely international cities that could host something like that. But we would like to see an NFL team in such a city first," end of quote from Roger Goodell. Goodell's revelations aren't necessarily shocking, given the NFL's perpetual desire to increase its revenue streams and fueling its international growth in terms of the physical product. Interest of foreign fans and additional broadcast opportunities is probably the most logical vehicle to further that objective, given the relative saturation on those fronts domestically. Yet his comments do beg these 5 questions should the league put down roots outside of America. Number 1, where would the NFL play an international Super Bowl? It's hard to imagine an answer other than London, which has 2 NFL caliber venues, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium and Wembley Stadium, the latter with room for 90,000 fans. The city has also essentially served as the league's international hub since 2007, when the Giants and Miami Dolphins played the first regular season game outside of North America, with the exception of 2020 when the world was on lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. The NFL has returned to London every year since and played multiple games there annually since 2013. The United Kingdom has the fan base, infrastructure, logistical means to handle a large influx of visitors and ability to handle the vast security requirements Super Sunday demands. Kicking off at 8:30 p.m. locally would translate to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S., 3 hours earlier than Super Bowls typically start. Yet neither the teams involved nor the American market would be especially thrown off kilter. Question number 2, where would the NFL base an international team or teams? London, again, would likely be the same answer, essentially for the same reasons, including the fact that games there have become something of a normal endeavor in NFL circles. Quote, "In the old days, quote unquote, we really tried to learn about the inconvenience or the additional travel considerations for international games," NFL VP of Broadcast Planning Mike North told the Cincinnati Bengals website earlier this year. Quote, "I know it's not quite routine, but it's getting to the point where it's pretty routine. You play an afternoon game over there. It's morning over here. You are back in the facility by midnight on Sunday night. That's better than if it's played out in Seattle or Los Angeles. Having just one team in Europe would seemingly come with an unfair logistical strain. A flight from London merely to New York is roughly 3,500 miles, which is about 20% longer than the distance from Seattle to Miami, currently the NFL cities that are the furthest geographically apart. Imagine sending a London team to Los Angeles maybe twice in a season if the schedule fell that way. Travel could be curbed by giving a European-based team longer homestands and corresponding road trips, but that would still force those players to be away from their home routine and families for extended periods of time, even if the relative travel burden was reduced. It seems like too much of a competitive disadvantage to place on one franchise. The alternate solution could be to base an entire division in Europe, 2 teams in London, 2 teams in Germany, Frankfurt, Munich, perhaps, maybe 1 in Spain. The league is returning to Madrid this season after what seemed a smashing debut in 2025, and Real Madrid's Bernabeu is arguably the world's most advanced stadium, including an elaborate field management system, retractable roof, and 360-degree video screens among its features. Having 4 teams in Europe would also lend itself to a permanent broadcast window on Sunday mornings, and that means money bags. Number 3, could other international cities make more sense? Probably not. Games in Brazil don't create problems from a time zone, read kickoff perspective, but the flights there are roughly doubly long compared to Europe. The Buffalo Bills played a game annually in Toronto, Canada's most populous city, from 2008 to 2013, but they haven't been back since. The final 2 games not even close to filling capacity at the Rogers Centre, though those were the pre-Josh Allen days, yet also back when the since refurbished Skydome could accommodate 50,000 fans. After a 4-year hiatus, the league will return to Mexico City this year for its 6th regular season game there since 2005. Despite ardent Mexican fan support and a generally closer proximity to major American cities, basing a team there would likely come with increased security ramifications as well as a far more pronounced language barrier. Question number 4, would the NFL just move the Jaguars to London? Though the franchise has seemingly had one paw in the UK forever, the Jags have played 14 games in London, giving them at least double the international appearances of any other NFL team. It seems unlikely to permanently relocate at this point, though owner Shad Khan also has the Premier League's Fulham FC, which is based in London, as part of his portfolio. The Jaguars moved into their new $120 million training facility just 3 years ago. Meanwhile, Jacksonville's Everbank Stadium is in the midst of upgrades, approximately $1.5 billion that should be finished by the start of the 2028 season. And the final question, the 5th question, will NFL players want to play for international teams? It's a complex question, one likely to evolve over time and which has no one-size-fits-all answer. But unlike international basketball, soccer, or hockey stars, American football players are currently unaccustomed to playing overseas. Unfamiliar languages, customs, exchange rates, and taxes have been vexing for expat American athletes in the past. Read up on the long relocated Montreal Expos. But while the NFL Players Association would certainly have to be on board with the notion of a squad or squads abroad if it means expansion, ergo more jobs for players, that's a strong enticement for any union. Still, it could be challenging for teams and foreign locales to retain and recruit top players. End of article. All right, let's take a look at international news story. Defiant Zelensky says Ukraine will not give in. Article is by Daniel Flynn and Anna Pruknicka from Reuters. Ukraine wants peace, but will not just surrender to Russia at any price. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in a defiant speech on August 24th to mark Independence Day, as foreign leaders pledged their support. Flanked by British Prime Minister Andy Burnham and European Council President Antonio Costa, Zelensky praised the resilience of the Ukrainian people during more than 4 years of war with Russia. Quote, Ukraine absolutely wants peace, but it is not ready to simply surrender, Zelensky said, warning that Russia would not halt its aggression even if Ukraine ceded to its demands for more territory in the country's east. Wearing a traditional Ukrainian embroidered shirt, Zelensky thanked several foreign leaders for traveling to Kiev to show their continued backing on the 35th anniversary of Ukraine's break from the Soviet Union. Burnham, who took office just last month, said his choice of Kiev for his first foreign visit showed the importance he attached to assisting in Ukraine's defense. Quote, "We are with you in the struggle all the way, heart and soul," Burnham said, vowing to continue that support. Quote, "Despite Russia's outrageous threats to my country." Britain announced on August 24th that it would allow Kiev access to classified technology to start production of European Scalp long-range cruise missiles in Ukraine. The missiles are capable of carrying out strikes deep within Russia. In response, the Kremlin said the use of classified British technology would, quote, "add fuel to the fire of their worsening relations," after it warned London last week there would be consequences for supplying drones to Kiev. Burnham was scheduled to co-chair a virtual meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, a group of countries backing Ukraine, with French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. The leaders were expected to discuss Ukraine's request for more air defense systems to stop Russian ballistic missiles pounding Ukrainian cities. Zelensky said on October 22nd that Ukraine's war effort was complicated by a $27 billion defense funding gap this year. He also warned that Russia could escalate the conflict later this year by mobilizing some 300,000 additional troops after parliamentary elections in September. End of article. In our next article, Donald Trump announces hike on Canada auto tariffs. Article is by Joey Garrison of the USA from USA Today. President Donald Trump said he's doubling tariffs on imported automobiles and auto parts from Canada to a rate of 50%, further escalating a trade war with the United States' northern neighbor that erupted over the weekend after negotiations between the two countries collapsed. Trump announced the move in an August 24th post on Truth Social, saying Canada has been ripping off the United States of America for years and accusing the country of placing, quote, "ridiculously high tariffs on U.S. farm exports to Canada." He said the new tariff rate will begin January 1, 2027. Build in the U.S. and there are zero tariffs. Canada will be treated like a state no longer. On trade and in other ways also, they are among the worst nations in the world to deal with. They feel entitled, and yet we don't need Canada. They need us, Trump said. Trump's latest threat comes after 50% U.S. tariffs on many other Canadian goods went into effect just after midnight on October 22nd, after his administration was unable to strike a deal with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Democrats seized on the tariffs ahead of the November midterm elections, warning the taxes on imports will result in American consumers paying higher costs. After ordering Canada's trade negotiators to return home, Carney said Canada would match Trump's tariffs dollar for dollar with retaliatory tariffs to take effect on September 8th. Canada will impose tariffs on U.S. steel, dairy, appliances, agricultural equipment, pulp and paper, and electronics, along with some products the United States previously targeted in Canada, Carney said from Ottawa's Parliament building. The government will release details on its response in the coming days, he said. Quote, "We cannot accept what they have offered, and we will not give what they have asked," Carney said. Carney is one of the few global leaders to retaliate against U.S. tariffs and has pledged to forge new trade and military alliances despite Canada's dependence on the United States for nearly 70% of its exports. Trump last year imposed a baseline 25% tariff on imported automobiles and auto parts, though the rate differs from some trading partners based on deals reached with his administration. Trump, in his social media post, also said he would hike Canada's steel tariff to 50%, but it is already set at 50%. The 50% tariffs that went into effect August 22nd applied to just over 5% of Canadian exports to the United States, including on various goods such as wine, dairy, hockey sticks, and cement. Carney said about $28 billion worth of goods would be tariffed. They do not apply to exempted goods, including energy, potash, fish, and critical minerals. The tariffs do not qualify for preferential treatment under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which shielded many Canadian goods from earlier U.S. tariffs. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer called the breakdown, quote, a missed opportunity for Canada to partner with the United States, saying no new talks were planned with Canada. End of article. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Democrat and Chronicle on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. All right, let's take a look at some business-related stories. Target's grocery gamble is paying off. Retailer seeks gains beyond food aisles. Article is by Nicholas P. Brown and Huvario Tabassum out of Reuters. Target's bet on groceries helped drive its fastest growth in that business in 3 years, but a lasting turnaround hinges on whether it can persuade shoppers who come for milk and snacks to buy higher margin goods elsewhere. Food and beverage sales grew 7% in Target's quarter ended August 1st, building on gains in the prior period after many quarters of tepid growth as new CEO Michael Fidelki pushes to make grocery a bigger draw. But food carries lower margins than apparel, home goods, and other discretionary merchandise, meaning the strategy ultimately must translate into broader spending, investors and analysts said. It's mission critical, said Sarah Henry, managing director at Target shareholder Logan Capital Management. Grocery purchases attract shoppers more frequently than most discretionary purchases, she said, making food a key traffic driver for a retailer trying to regain momentum rather than simply adding products. Target has revamped large parts of its grocery department around higher growth categories, giving more prominence to protein snacks such as Misfits bars and Cloud chips, and redesigning aisles and displays to encourage browsing and impulse purchases. Grocery accounts for less than a quarter of Target's merchandise sales, well below rival Walmart's 59%. Euromonitor data seen by Reuters showed Target held about 5% of the U.S. grocery market at the end of 2025, compared with Walmart's 27%. But matching Walmart's scale is not the goal, said Jacob Aiken Phillips, consumer research director at Melius Research. Quote, the right measure of success is whether Target's food business grows faster than the category and pulls incremental visits, and the strategy only pays off if those trips carry into the rest of the store, he said. Target plans to add about 600 private label food and beverage products over the next 2 years, including 400 under its Good and Gather banner. The company expects its moves to drive more than $2 billion in growth over the next few years, a Target spokesperson told Reuters. Traffic rose 3.6% in the latest quarter, while snacks, one of Target's strongest food categories, grew 15%. Growth in membership and advertising revenue in the latest quarter, along with nearly $1 billion in tariff refunds, gave Target some cushion to lean into low-priced groceries, said Logan Capital's Henry. The real test, however, will come in the second half of the year, which includes back to school and holiday shopping, she said. Its hardlines business, Fun 101, jumped 10.6%, and beauty sales rose about 7%. But home furnishings and apparel for Target, two key categories, were roughly flat. End of article. And our next article, job seekers say hiring process is, quote, broken. Applicants cite AI use, lack of employer trust. Article is by Rachel Barber of the USA Today. After getting a layoff notice in May, software engineer Todd Hendricks, 46, started his job search. One Friday, he signed on to Zoom for the coding round of an interview process. No No one appeared. He reached out to the recruiter and heard nothing back. On Monday, the company emailed to say it was not moving forward with his application based on his performance in the interview. He says never happened. Hendricks is one of many American job seekers who believe the hiring process is, quote, broken. Finding a job has rarely been easy, but in 2026, fierce competition, the growing use of artificial intelligence, and a lack of trust in employers have further complicated the process. U.S. employers added a historically low number of jobs in 2025. Hiring bounced back in the spring, but has cooled since. Employers shed 23,000 roles in July. Much of the recent growth has been concentrated in a few select sectors like healthcare. The search is tougher for candidates who, like Hendricks, are looking for a job in technology, an industry that accounts for 31% of all job cuts announced this year so far, according to a Challenger Gray and Christmas report. The nation's unemployment rate was relatively low at 4.1% in July, though economists say it has fallen this year largely because workers dropped out of the labor force. Some analysts believe one reason for the departures is job search burnout. After being laid off in May 2023, Candy Peterson said she secured a new job 3 months later, only to be laid off again in September. The executive administrative business partner eventually began applying to everything that matched her skill set, though she has landed some contract work. Peterson, 54, said that about 5,000 applications later, she's still without a full-time job. Amanda Dobson, founder of Clear Pathways, an HR and leadership advisory firm, said one of the problems with hiring today may be that volume has replaced intention for job seekers and recruiters alike. The explosion of remote work in the COVID-19 pandemic led to more applicants vying for the same jobs around the country rather than competing with just those in their area or those willing to relocate, Dobson said. U.S. applicants per open role have doubled since spring 2022. According to LinkedIn research released at the start of 2026, it found that 65% of people said finding a job had become harder, citing competition as the main obstacle. Recruiters reviewed about 100 applications per role in early 2021. They are now processing 291 applications per hire, according to a 2026 Talent Trends report by Ashby, a recruiting platform. Vicky Salemi, a career expert at job listing site Monster, said she has seen lifeguards apply to certified public accountant roles and a candidate applied to 10 positions at the same company at one time, a red flag to the employer. She and Dobson tell job seekers to narrow their search, with Dobson advising thought in answering application questions. A problem with that approach may be that only 10% of job seekers think that most of their applications are reviewed by a human, according to Live Careers 2025 Job Search Frustration Survey. Dobson said they're right to be skeptical. I talk with a lot of HR professionals, and in the recruitment process, they're not looking at every single resume. She said they're letting the systems do that. At 93%, most recruiters surveyed by LinkedIn late in 2025 said they plan to increase their AI use in 2025, and 59% said the technology was already helping them discover new candidates. Some have gone so far as to introduce AI interviewers. Quote, nobody talks to you, Peterson said. But applicants are using AI too. The LinkedIn survey found 81% of people had used AI to assist their job search or plan to. Hendricks described it as an automation arms race. Then there's the question of whether a listed job is even real. The usual way people measure job market tightness is by comparing the number of open jobs with the number of unemployed people. However, a large and rising share of job postings target already employed workers or represent inactive listings, a Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis analysis said in November 2025. A company may post a role while planning to hire internally or recruiting someone. A budget change could mean a role that was once real is now cut. Candidates call these listings ghost jobs. Another Ashby report released in 2025 analyzing data from its customer base found that 82% of open jobs in 2024 led to a real hire, but that 5.5% were paused, 1% led to an offer but no hire, and 3.5% were pulled without a reason given. Applicants have no way to know whether another candidate was selected or the hiring plan changed or the position was never actively filled, and it was just a listing to increase the appearance of success on the part of the company, Hendricks said. Salimi said that while it's true there are job postings unemployed candidates never had a realistic chance of getting, companies don't post them just for fun, but rather to build a talent pipeline or stack of resumes for their next opening. Candidates have more trust in job postings when companies share clear salary ranges and transparent expectations for workload and hours, a new Monster report found, but they don't always get them. Only 10% of workers say job descriptions always accurately reflect the reality of the role, according to the Monster report. Candidates also are navigating scam offers. At 95%, most job seekers have encountered a suspicious job offer, and 98% said today's job market increases vulnerability to scams, a separate Monster report found. And you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the August 25th issue of the Democrat Chronicle. Your reader today has been Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.